Hello, this is Will Hull, and this will be Unit 2 for Montana, Division D. We've now moved over to Division D, hearing for the We the People National Finals. In a moment, I'll have the judges introduce themselves, followed by the students, and then we'll begin the hearing. Students will deliver a 4-minute prepared statement, followed by 8 minutes of judge questions. My microphone will be muted during the hearing, but I will be holding up the 1-minute sign so you can see what it looks like, and the time sign following each of those periods in the hearing. If those of you who are controlling the Zoom want to change it over into the gallery view, it's in the top right-hand corner, the view where you can see all the faces. That would be great. And at this point, I'll go ahead and, I forgot one thing. At the conclusion of the hearing, the judges are also going to give feedback to your team based on their presentation and follow-up question responses. At this point, I'll go ahead and pass it over to the judging panel where they can introduce themselves.
Good afternoon. My name is Julie Silverbrook. I'm the Senior Director of Partnerships and Constitutional Scholar in Residence at iCivics.
Good afternoon. I am Tim Igo. I'm a lawyer, writer, and magazine editor at the State Bar of Arizona in Phoenix.
And I'm Nick Drummond. I'm an assistant professor of political science at Black Hills State University in South Dakota.
You guys can go ahead and introduce yourselves to us.
I'm Jenna Scott. I'm Hannah Bickle. And I'm Leah Smith. We are seniors at Laurel High School, and our honor civics teacher is Mr. Deming.
Wonderful. I am going to go ahead and let you know which question you'll be answering. You can go ahead and sit down and get ready for the presentation. I will then read that question to you in full. So you will be answering question 1, and I will now read that to you. What were the major disagreements among the 55 delegates during the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia, and how were they resolved? What issues, if any, were not resolved, and what were the consequences? What changes, if any, should be made to the Constitution? You may begin whenever you're ready.
The Philadelphia Convention allowed delegates to debate their opinions on how the Constitution should be written, how the government would work, and the limits that would be set. There were multiple issues that were brought up at the convention, which led to debate, including representation, specifically regarding large and small states, and slavery. They also discussed what power should be given to the states and what powers will be given to the federal government.
One of the main issues discussed at the convention was how states would be represented. There were two significant proposals debated at the meeting. First, the Virginia plan, which granted representation based on population. It also proposed a bicameral legislative branch. The other was the New Jersey plan, which proposed to maintain the one vote per state found in the Articles of Confederation and a unicameral legislative branch. Using the Virginia plan as a base, they added elements of the New Jersey plan, which led to the great compromise that gave us both proportional and equal representation within our legislative branch.
Moreover, there were arguments that slaves should be included in the count for representation as well as for taxes. Those in the northern states generally did not like the idea of slaves being counted for representation because southern states would have more representation than northern states. On the other hand, most in the southern states believe they should be counted for representation. James Madison defined slavery and personhood in Federalist 54. He argued that slaves had qualities of both property and personhood, so they should be counted, but as less than whole people. As a compromise, for every 5 slaves, 3 were counted. This is known as the 3/5 compromise. The consequences of that decision are still debated today.
Another issue that was heavily debated was the federal versus state power. Some supported a strong state government, while others pushed for a strong national government. The Constitution ended up having a substantially stronger central government than the Articles of Confederation, but the power was still balanced. Framers upheld the principle of federalism, which allowed for state and regional governments as well as the national government to have power within the country. Some of the lines between Federalists and Anti-Federalists were seen at this convention. However, some of those at the convention strayed from their original thinking during the ratification debate. An example of this is James Madison, who initially was against adding a Bill of Rights, ended up not only writing it, but also advocating for its addition to the Constitution.
The issue of slavery was not fully resolved at the convention. The Constitution never specifically states the word slave or slavery in the text. Instead, it only references it ambiguously. In Article 1, they work around the word slave when talking about restrictions of Congress on slave trade. But instead of saying slave trade, they say the migration or importation of such persons.
The ambiguity around the constitutionality of slavery would be part of the cause of the Civil War beginning in 1861. Another issue that was brought up with the ambiguity surrounding a certain topic is whether or not a state could secede from the Union. It isn't clearly stated either way, which is why when the Southern states seceded from the Union, there was a big upheaval which led to the Civil War.
Furthermore, Article 5 of the Constitution provides for amendments. Through this avenue, we have added 27 amendments to the Constitution, but some additional changes should and will be passed in the future. Amendments like the Equal Rights Amendment, which could be added to provide non-discrimination protection based on sexual orientation or gender identity. An amendment that could be added to limit the amount of time a Supreme Court justice could maintain their seat on the court rather than having it be a lifetime decision. Also, we could consider limiting the age at which a president is able to run for office. There's a minimum age, but adding a maximum age could also be beneficial. This likely wasn't thought of at the convention because the life expectancy has almost doubled since the 1800s. Because America has changed since the foundation of the Constitution, it's sometimes necessary to make amendments like these.
The major disagreements among the 55 delegates of the Philadelphia Convention were very important in the formation of the Constitution. The most significant included representation in Congress, federal power, and slavery. These issues were subject to much deliberation and debate, and some of them still are today. We're now open to answering your questions.
Great, thanks so much. I will ask the first question. You brought up as one possible Article 5 amendment that you would support would be putting limits on the tenure of Supreme Court justices. And I wanted to get a sense of whether or not you think there ought to be an increase in the number of justices on the US Supreme Court, which would not require a constitutional amendment. Congress currently has the authority to do that. Do you support that? Why or why not? And you may be aware that there is currently a proposal in the US Congress to do just that.
I think that adding Supreme Court justices could be helpful, but I don't think it would make that much of a difference. Like throughout the history of the United States, the number of Supreme Court justices has been an influx. Like there has been 7, and right now there's 9, I believe. But I think that just making the age at which you are no longer able to be a Supreme Court justice, or having it be like a 15-year commitment would be better, just because it gives opportunity for other people to have that position, other than having the same people on the Supreme Court, just on the Supreme Court, like for as long as they are alive, practically.
Let me pose a follow-up question, which is, so you've submitted an argument for why there ought to be a term limit for Supreme Court justices, but what's the risk potentially to there being a term limit? Because obviously the convention delegates decided on a lifetime appointment.
I think the issue with that would be how the Supreme Court justices are selected, and since they are appointed instead of elected, I think that that would have some effect on how that would happen.
Okay, thank you. I'll invite my colleagues to also ask any questions they'd like to ask.
Sure, thank you very much. Let me ask about, let's move to term limits for legislators now. You touched upon this, but I'm curious your thoughts on the possible benefits of having term limits for legislators, and whether you would support such a thing.
Well, one definite benefit would be having people who were slightly more with the times, to use a common phrase, people who understand what was happening in the US and what is happening in the US as time progresses, as different generations have different ideals and values. And sometimes those who have been on that court for a while do not understand the newer generation's values.
Sure. Anyone else?
I would just add to what my colleague said, that having those term limits could not only give us a younger opinion and view in that sense, but it could also additionally prevent some sort of tyranny with having certain people being on certain positions for such a long extended period of time. And I think changing that in a more timely manner could help to prevent tyranny in the sense that one person wouldn't be having all that power for such a long time.
Thank you.
One of the major points of contention at the convention, and certainly during the great debate that took place afterwards in the newspapers, was about the appropriate size of the republic. Could you say something about this debate? What were the major disagreements, and what side of the debate do you support, and why?
If I remember correctly, James Madison was in favor of the republic being smaller, therefore giving less room for factions to be able to grow, because people had more common interests, and therefore keeping it more towards the republic and less of the democracy side of government. And I would agree with that a republic to truly function at its best, it needs to be slightly smaller than perhaps most governments would be, to allow people to have their voice heard through that republic.
James Madison actually supported a larger republic, like he stated in Federalist 10, I believe, when he was talking about fractions. But he didn't think that factions could occur in larger republics. So personally, I think having a larger republic is better because it gives more opportunity for people to have other opinions and not just kind of having this same ideas, even if they are like in smaller communities, people generally have the same kind of ideas, but with larger ones, they can have different opinions.
Maybe a related question, then, since we're talking about the size of the republic, certainly we are far larger in terms of space and population than we were at the founding. Do you think we ought to increase the size of Congress, one of the houses, or both, to correspond with that increase in size?
We kind of have changed the size of Congress because with the number of the population within the states correlates to the amount of representatives in the House of Representatives, but I think maintaining the Senate size makes sense. I know that recently, I believe DC was added as a state, so they would get 2 senators as well to also represent them. So if there were more states added to the union, then we would also have larger houses in the legislative branch.
And I think it would be especially helpful to have more representation for such a large country that we are, because I think it was Washington who said he had a ratio for about how many representatives should be for the number of people in our country, and we have largely surpassed that. And so I think in order to represent the people more accurately, I think having more representatives in Congress would be helpful.
You know, I'm fascinated by the question of a maximum age for president. So I'd like to know what you think that maximum age possibly should or could be, and whether statistically, because women live longer, there should be a higher maximum for women presidents than for men.
Well, for my personal opinion, I think that the age should be probably 65, just because that would be the general retiring age. But I think that would also should be the same for women, even though they live for longer. Statistically, I just think after a certain point, it's kind of harder to develop changing opinions. So I think that over time, having older presidents like we've had in the last couple elections, they have all been well above the age bracket of the workforce for a very long time.
All right, thank you so much. I'll have to stop you there. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. Great job. I just looked this up and I thought you might be interested in this. The median age of a president at inauguration, if you look over the course of American history, is age 55. So I just thought I would throw that out there for you since we were talking about that as the last question. I thought you did a nice job going through the key questions that came up with respect to Article 1 during your opening statement. I would have, especially since you brought it up in your proposal for change to the Constitution, you brought up both the Supreme Court and the president. I would have liked to have seen a little bit more about how those Article 2 and Article 3 were discussed during the convention during your opening remarks. But overall, I think you did a nice job. You answered our questions on my questions on the limit on the tenure of Supreme Court justices. Would have liked to see a little bit of a deeper exploration of why lifetime appointments were chosen by the Constitutional Convention delegates and how political pressure on the justices might change if they didn't have a lifetime appointment, but instead served a 15-year term. But overall, I think you guys did a really nice job. You should be very proud. I'll invite my colleagues to share feedback now as well.
Sure. Let me say I enjoyed the conversation very, very much. You brought up some things I hadn't heard before today, so that was very nice to hear new things. I would love to hear more about this, the secession right, the belief that there's a right to secession. You wisely pointed out that all these issues, including the elephant in the room, which is slavery in the Constitution, continue to be discussed today. I would like to deeper dive into some of the platforms that currently are engaged in those continuing things, such as voting rights and how that impacts people of color, the fact that state prison populations are counted in the census, which gives a lot more legislative power to rural areas where prisoners are than urban areas, and how that plays out. But an excellent conversation. Thank you very much.
Second, echo the statements of my colleagues. What really jumped out to me that hasn't been mentioned yet is that all of you, I think, contributed. All of you had something important to say. You took the opportunities to say that, and I like seeing that kind of team unity emerge. The question about Madison, the size of the public, maybe the only other thing I was looking for was mentioning civic virtue, the concern of the anti-federalists that a large republic that might begin to erode, and that makes it difficult for the people to ever collectively form and defend themselves against elites. But the argument of Madison and Federalist Tenet, I thought you handled that well. So thank you.
Okay, well, that brings us to the end of this hearing for Montana Unit 2 for Division D. Thank you very much to the judges, and I'll go ahead and send the judges to the break room at this point.
Thanks. Congrats.
Thank you.
All right, so at this point, I'm going to stop the recording and